So I will kick us off as I'm Dr. Karen Bierce. I'm the Interim Vice President for Academic Affairs, also serving as the Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs, and our faculty professional development rolls up to me. And so want to help everybody who is part of this session kind of have some general management of how this is going to work. You will learn from these amazing faculty that what we've learned works really well with faculty is panel presentations that allow us to share our expertise. And what I have learned through the Zoom age is apparently I make a kick-ass moderator. So that's what I will be doing, is moderating the chat and helping to moderate this discussion. We ask that you guys stay muted, but actively use the chat, and then we will have some period of time at the end where we can unmute, but we want to make sure that we can hear each other. But I will be monitoring the chat as we go. And so I'm going to ask our first question to our CTLT fellows here at Northampton Community College. Who are we? Tell us about the CTLT, about who we reach out to, a little bit about Northampton.
I will defer to our most senior member.
Okay, yeah. Our Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology is really the result of a reboot that we did 4 years ago from our old Center for Teaching and Learning. We invested in 2 brand new centers, physical centers, which you'll see more about in a little bit. And really our primary purpose is to provide professional development for faculty and as well as staff and administrators, and we provide opportunities for a pretty eclectic bunch of folks, which is probably one of our real virtues and something that we like to hang our hat on, which you'll hear more about some of the specific things we've been doing later. We have about 130 full-time faculty, I believe. I want to say probably about 800 adjuncts in any given semester, more or less.
Randy, I'll bump you for a second. Of those eclectic individuals, which one of them are you? Because that was the question: is who are you?
I'm sorry. I teach English. I'm a professor of English at our Monroe campus in Tannersville, and I'm closing out my tenure as a CTLT fellow. Our Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology is faculty driven by design, which means that we don't have an administrator, and that 2 faculty fellows, as you can see this past year, it was Dustin and me. We received 9 credits of release time to provide the programming, do promotion, basically make stuff happen for faculty. And then we also have, what's Becca's official? She's the incoming person to replace me, who has 3 credits of release time to kind of learn things before they get fully immersed in the role as a faculty fellow. So the idea is that the majority of our load is really dedicated toward running the center. And you'll hear some later too. There are some distinct advantages to having faculty in the positions working with providing professional development for faculty.
I'm Dustin Briggs, Associate Professor of Communication and CTLT Fellow. I'll be going into year 3 in this role, and I kind of came in as we learned about the transition that we're going to share today. My spring and first summer was our pandemic time, and so it represented a dramatic shift in what we as CTLT offer and how we do that programming.
I'm Rebecca Martin. I am the Associate Fellow or intern in training to be, however people decided. I'm the first woman to come into this role, which was a fun change, but also I wanted an ability to kind of try it out first because it was a big undertaking and I wanted to see if it was really a fit for me. So I really liked having just like a peek in, and I will now be starting my first full official year as a full-time fellow next year with Dustin.
And I am very lucky as the administrator overseeing the Centers for Teaching, Learning, Technology, and working really closely with these faculty. And what you will learn over the course of the next half an hour is we really truly abide by the faculty driven, faculty led, having this be a grassroots opportunity. And the Zoom age has definitely shared that is more critical now than ever. And so I will use that as an opportunity to ask our next question. So our next question
Can I interrupt? Can I
of
interrupt
course
for a
you
second?
can, Randy.
We got a question in the chat, which is how the faculty fellows are selected, which is we put out a call for applicants. We've never had more than one applicant per year. So by design, they're 2-year positions so that one person will rotate out, one new person will rotate in, and you'll have someone there who's the constant. In true higher ed fashion, this is my 4th year and it will be Dustin's 3rd year because of the
Fourth year of
pandemic.
a 2-year appointment.
Yeah, so the pandemic hit and sort of shook things up a little bit because we had to go into crisis mode that spring and then uh, had all kinds of things to deal with heading in. So, but yeah, that's a great question. We've only ever had 4 people. We've had 5 fellows and had 4 people apply. So uh, people. The small number of applicants stings a little bit, but one thing that I think we've been good about is we've been very upfront about what the positions entail, and I think that tends to scare some people off. And some people have had issues, getting approved to do it because it is 60% of their course load as well. So we've been working that out actually over time.
So
Thank you.
Randy, in one of your answers, so we just demonstrated one thing that hit the CTLT and our faculty development when the pandemic hit is 2-year terms were laughable and they became 4-year terms or 3-year terms. Another critical part of changes that happened for us, and you'd mentioned it, we in 2018 went through some pretty significant renovations to physical rooms. This is just showing you 2 of our fantastic spaces at one of our campuses. That we have an enhanced technology classroom that was really designed to be an experiential learning space for faculty. We created a faculty lounge, and these were heavily used, as well as we had a video room, a small breakout room, and work sessions. And one of the critical things that we will talk about is that we went from being excited to use these physical spaces and working together in person to what we've all become familiar with and we're doing right now, which is this became our CTLT space. And I purposefully pulled some screenshots that you may see some of these faces today, and doing some awesome things in our virtual space. And so our CTLT space, like our classroom spaces, went to Zoom. And at first, fellows, what did we think was going to happen?
Well, it was. Well, I'll go back. So I was one of the people who did apply to be to be a faculty fellow, and the heart of my application was using those beautiful physical spaces that we showed before. Those are really neat spots. And when we were in our traditional on-ground spaces, these were often full of, if not people, good conversation, interesting events to go to, and nearly every day you could go there and have something academically interesting happen, either building relationships or furthering your teaching ability. And in my application, a lot of the things I said is, all right, I'm going to bring snacks into this space. We're going to have sessions where we talk about good ideas for teaching. And we're going to try to build up a culture of improvement amongst the folks that we have. And then we had the last CTLT event that we had was, I actually, it was before I was in the role. I held a session that day about a teaching idea I had. I hosted a game night later that night, and then we never went back. For quite a bit of time afterwards. And so we really needed to shift how this whole operation worked. And it was a quick shift. We had to figure out how to get offerings to people at a time they needed it more than usual, but were less available to use the resources that we had crafted for that purpose. So we stepped up summer in a really different way. Randy, do you have numbers from that first summer?
I do. So like everyone else, our priority in the summer was getting people familiar with Blackboard, getting people some strategies for teaching online and that sort of thing. And we offered programming in the summer of 2020 from July 7th to August 12th, so about 5 weeks. We had 513 participants, and of those, we had 232 unduplicated participants, 141 of which were adjunct faculty. So it was a crazy summer. That was a crazy summer for everyone, but it was truly a crazy summer. Everything we threw out there attracted 70 people, which we shouldn't have gotten used to.
Well, and so this whole process is an illustration of trying to meet need with a way of getting people to do it that they can actually receive it. And for a brief period of time during that summer when folks were heavily focused on tool acquisition to prepare for a fully remote semester in most cases, um, folks were coming out in droves to learn these tools and entirely optional. These folks had no commitment to go to professional development over the summer, and many of them were not full-time folks at all. There's a huge adjunct group who participated in our events that otherwise would not have had to. This was when our offering met the need in our first attempt. That didn't happen every time, but it was us meeting the moment in a way that we hadn't really prepared for before. And
Yeah, and
go ahead.
it's worth noting too that our role is to provide development for faculty really to instruct their classes. We also have an Office of Online Learning and Ed Tech who really did the nitty gritty, how to use Blackboard, how to use Zoom type of stuff. So what we were doing was really geared toward faculty teaching classes and working with students and not so much on software and navigating the tools and things like that. So our online learning and ed tech team, uh, was doing more intensive stuff than we were, but the sheer amount of professional development and learning that people were willing to do that summer was unbelievable.
So our primary role, we learned, was to try to be responsive to an evolving need for the folks that we were serving, because both that the group that we were serving had moved to a larger part-time population. The place that we were serving them had moved nearly entirely remote, and the needs of these folks were significantly different. The things that the easy connections that we had that happened independently or us as cursory elements just weren't existing. People didn't have an opportunity to interact on accident or for fun or for enrichment. And so we kind of established our themes to try to get at what we thought people needed. So our students were different. They were approaching classes differently, and not necessarily so. Our teaching practices were entirely different. Many of us had to chop down the content of our class and rebuild completely in order to prepare for a new semester. And we needed to make sure that folks who had never taught in that environment before had the opportunity to thrive and the students' experience wouldn't suffer. And that involved a lot of technology, especially for folks who maybe had never used anything like this technology in their classes. And in fact, were probably actively avoiding it, now needed to do that in order for their classes to run. And we found out really quickly that the isolation of the pandemic hurt people professionally as much as personally, and how much those things were intertwined. Folks missed each other, and a lot of the satisfaction of the job was wrapped up in the chances that they had to interact. And without those interactions, the quality of life and quality of work weren't quite the same, and we were trying to meet that need.
So I'm going to use that as an opportunity to ask sort of a follow-up question. Right, Randy and Dustin, you both shared that in that summer and that fall, we had a voluntary, strong push from full-time and part-time faculty saying, help me build relationships with my students in a virtual format that I'm not accustomed to, still deliver the content that I need to deliver, use technology in innovative and engaging ways. And they came to us in droves that summer and fall. What happened? How did that stay at Northampton? Was that the lingering, like once they were hooked into our virtual Zoom professional development, did those high numbers continue?
Yeah, so this is kind of a lead into our next themes. if you can put yourself back in that time, a lot of people were burning out on Zoom and the online experience very hard, physically, emotionally. People were just burnt out in general in life because pandemic life had beaten everyone up, and all the challenges with students and teaching and technology and all that. And we revisit our themes every year. And so it was kind of past the point where people needed the basic bare bones skills. They kind of got over, the ones who were going to get over that hump, got over that hump. And it gave us a little more latitude to think a little more broadly. Like, the summer of 2020 and the next fall in particular, we're really just making sure that people knew what they were doing and were able to do what they wanted to do in their classes. And I feel like after that, it became a little bit of a luxury to think, okay, now we can take as a given that people really know their way around Blackboard and Zoom and or Collaborate or whatever platforms they're using. And we got to kind of rethink what was really important, what institutional priorities were, what our students needed. And in our roles as faculty fellows, we heard a lot from faculty, so in the sessions we were running informally, and so I'll let Dustin talk to the themes that we came up with for this. Was actually in on coming up with these themes as well.
Hmm. Yeah, so I mean, we essentially lost our unique share of people's Zoom time. We got there quick and were able to help folks through that method. But when everything was on Zoom all the time, the last thing that you felt like doing with your extra time was signing on for a workshop on a tool that you might not want to incorporate after you've already included all the other ones. And so we needed to change our direction to be able to meet the evolving needs of folks. The tools, they had figured out what they were going to rely on. We've armed that tool belt as much as we could. So we were going to try to focus on the things that were still missing in this environment, as many of us were still either primarily working from home or primarily teaching classes in some type of virtual context, either hybrid, remote, asynchronous, and not running into each other in the ways that we used to. So we settled on our 3 R's, which actually are all R's. It was difficult to say. But we focused on relationships, relevance, and resourcefulness, the things that we thought were going to solve what was missing from people's experience, both on the student side and the teaching side. So we wanted to help people make, continue, and refoster relationships between each other and themselves and their students. And I took as a premise that learning happens best through relationship, and relationship is harder or at least different to develop in the environment that we were now in. And we were going to work on how could we make that possible. Relevance came in the form of making sure that we were updating as the world did. So as our class delivery was different, our means of education needed to be different, and that wasn't necessarily the instinct for everyone immediately. We had been in survival mode, but hadn't purposefully adapted to try to reach how the students are going to be different and what was going to be more effective. And this was kind of our first chance to step back and say, what worked over this last year and what do I never want to do again? And then there were still problems that we didn't know how to solve. And we recognized that plan B was plan A for most classes now. And we wanted to figure out what stuff stays and goes. We wanted to collect the problem-solving work that had been done by our whole faculty base and put it together for the things that helped people succeed. And so we were focusing on the new and the refreshing of relationships between people, which just seemed like the thing that was still missing the most over that amount of time.
That first full year, we had heard a lot about compassion and empathy at the institutional level, but very much one-on-one and anecdotally as well. And the other thing that really went into the resourcefulness one was, if you remember the time when, plan B was just sort of the next first option. Like you had to be incredibly flexible and have A, B, C, and D in your pocket for any given moment. So we tried to capitalize on what people were struggling with and what issues that we had really heard about coming up, both from our fellow faculty and also as sort of institutional issues and higher ed issues as well.
So if that first summer we hit a home run, we took several swings and misses after that point, trying to get this right. And it was hard to match those needs that we shared there with a method that approached them in a way that, from a population, was largely burnt out with the format of online interactions. And so we were trying stuff, but we ran into some barriers that weren't creative ones as much as bandwidth ones for folks. So let's see. I think we got some examples of stuff that didn't quite work, which I'm greatly disappointed in because the amount of time in versus productivity out was a little bit embarrassing. So I don't know how many of you ended up relying on or saw folks who did rely on Flipgrid for assignments when things were virtual. Well, we thought, hey, this is a format that everyone's already pretty familiar with. We've ran a workshop on it before, and you get to see people's faces over videos that you might not have seen otherwise. So we decided on the idea of Faculty Flip, which is a faculty and staff only Flipgrid experience where you get to post videos either for a good idea for teaching or a refreshing thing that's keeping you going. And we were going to highlight the one of the week to give people in our weekly email. And this was a chance to see people thriving in an environment that they needed some inspiration from. And you can guess what probably went wrong here. Like people ate it up, but they didn't create it. Like nobody wanted to be the one generating that content. Either they didn't like their pandemic hairdo, or they didn't feel like spending additional time creating content that wasn't for students. We didn't get people generating the stuff. They appreciated the stuff that was out there, but we were asking people to generate more content when they were already filled to the brim of doing that exact work for students. That didn't work out for us.
Randy, you want to take the faculty wishing well?
Sure. So we had in the previous slide we had a little ideas for teaching that was sort of a flop too. And one of our ongoing challenges was to get ideas for workshops and sessions that we could offer that people really wanted to to come to and that were relevant in the moment. And we tried several things. The little ideas for teaching was sort of based on the premise that people would not toot their own horn, but they would call out their colleagues for things that they had done well. And they didn't really do that too well. And the faculty wishing well is something that we put on our website, and we put it in we did a weekly newsletter. We had the link in our weekly newsletter every week to try to get people to, tell us what they'd like, or an idea that they had, or was a way for us to try to figure out what type of content to provide that would resonate for people. And we that they had used the wishing well. I think we got three wishes over the course of about 4 months.
And that's a theme that goes along with the position of being a faculty fellow. We found, like, you can ask for feedback for what people want, but the general feedback that you get is, thanks for the stuff that you're doing. It's all great, but that gives you very, very little room to figure out how to improve and which content areas are necessary. So one of our primary roles is keeping an ear to the ground to figure out what's bubbling up in time enough to be responsive and provide that content. We hoped the wishing well would do that with people who generate things that they hope to see, but it became pretty clear to us that people didn't know what they wanted, but they wanted it there, and that became our role to figure it out, since we weren't going to be able to solicit that answer easily.
We also found, I think, that even as the world was starting to get a handle on the pandemic, and as we started to come back to campus with some of our classes, but still maintained a virtual space, that love of being back on campus for faculty development was not where people wanted to be all the time either. Did we try some stuff with some back on campus events earlier, before maybe this academic year that flopped as well?
I think we did. Another opportunity where enthusiasm didn't match results. Dawn, is that your mic?
Can we mute those that aren't presenting if possible? Thank you. Dustin?
Yeah. So we were trying to figure out when's the right time to dip our toes into getting people back into these spaces that they had missed with people they wanted to see. And so we were keeping our eye on case numbers and mask mandates and trying to figure out when is the best time to try to organize people. And so I decided that instead of dipping toes in, that we should splash in, and we attempted an event called Summer Splash. And it was more of a small ripple on the pond than a splash. We knew that people were going to have to, for the first time, return to spaces that they used to know, but were going to be different. And so we had hoped that we could gather people to tour these spaces, see how they were going to be different with new mandate rules, and get themselves ready to go. But what we found out was people weren't, they wanted to be ready, um, and in some cases, some folks were, but the commitment to return to the space wasn't there. It was what we realized was that the future was so ambiguous that even doing something like that to plan a few months out seemed like not a worthwhile activity, as it seemed more likely that we were going to take a hard turn in the other direction than we were to continue the way we were going. And honestly, they were right. By the time we got a month later, our case numbers had changed such that the number of classes we were going to do on ground was less than we had thought. And not many people beyond the ones that showed up to our summer splash ended up teaching in that format. So that was us trying to get to a world that wasn't ready for us yet, and our base kind of recognized that and intuitively. Frustrating enough to us because there were some really good cookies at that event too.
Well, and I will say, as the administrator here in this space, it also continued to demonstrate that the administrative wishes of getting faculty back on campus and engaged is not going to be your key to success for faculty development, that it really needs to be grassroots, faculty driven, faculty inspired, getting us back into the space. And so I'm sitting here and I'm a little worried, right? Like, we've done a lot and said, wow, Zoomland, we had some good ideas and good themes and faculty wanted things and they came out in droves, but then stuff stopped working. And I want us to shift, right? And so now the question is, okay, not everything failed. Not everything was a flop. Not everything was a ripple. And we had a wonderful new associate fellow joining us at this pivotal time saying, but we still need some pedagogical needs. We still need to support our faculty. And so through the strength of this team of 3 tremendous faculty, can you guys tell me a little bit, and everybody else that's here, what's actually worked? What have become sort of the takeaways that we would encourage others to think about?
I'll have Becca talk about Teaching Tuesday first if you want, and then I'll do this progression of stuff afterwards.
Came in right around the summer splash, and my background's a bit different from everyone else's. I have a master's in ed, in curriculum and instruction, so I have a really good basis in curriculum design and teaching theory and learning theory. I had a great advisor in college who told me, for God's sake, do something useful before you go to English graduate school where you'll never get a job. So I have this great background. And when I came in, one of the things I was really thinking about was that the pandemic had zapped people of a lot of energy. They were tired of screens, but they were also being challenged to teach in multiple modalities. They were being asked to teach courses in many different weeks, forms. So some were teaching 10 weeks, some 14 weeks, some 7 weeks. We had a bunch of different kinds of classes going on. And sometimes you can get a bit overwhelmed with all the different transitions you need to make all the time. So all the different technologies you need to integrate, but also all the different ways you're teaching. And so one of the things I really wanted to work on was establishing a space where weekly we could come together and talk about teaching and learning pedagogy. And we based them around articles, many of them from Inside Higher Ed, where people were talking about this too, because teaching pedagogy needs to be updated to meet the students that we're looking at right now. And many faculty have never been taught to teach. They've been taught to be biologists or chemists or engineers. And so I very much wanted to kind of bring in, a basis of like, let's learn about teaching a bit. And that became Teaching Tuesdays, and every week we'd get together and talk about it. And it generated a lot of conversation. I think people began to understand the sort of vastness of what they didn't know. And sometimes asking people for suggestions, it's difficult if they don't even know what pool they're swimming in. So as you give them a bit of a foundation of like, well, here's general, like, here's ways of approaching curriculum. You could approach curriculum design this way or this way or this way. And then suddenly they can say, oh, I'm interested in that one. Could you tell me more about that? Or, that one doesn't seem to fit, our diversity focus. So how would I make that work? And so they can ask better questions and we can give them more of what they need. And so that's where Teaching Tuesdays came from. And I think I'm hoping that we continue it. I think we definitely will. It led into a summer institute. We'd had summer institute recently. It's a 2-day wonderful professional development experience, and we did it on campus this year. And I offered a workshop on outcomes-based design or backward design, and that was sort of a natural outcome of Teaching Tuesdays, and people really, really responded well.
And as a strategy, what we found out ended up working, and Teaching Tuesday was a large part of it, is people were asking us for planned spontaneity, which is a lovely thing to request. We want scheduled time to be able to do something agendaless but meaningful, and that's a tough needle to thread. But what we found was if we could give people enough of an idea of what they were attending, that they would schedule it, but not so much that they could have the experience without the people in the room, then we'd get people coming back. And especially in these weekly meetings that you could plan your calendar around. So Teaching Tuesday was, on Tuesday, except for one we had on Wednesday. But that was Wacky Wednesday, so it was okay. And then the others was a consistent Friday meeting where we had folks design around being able to attend those. And we normally would have an article associated with either the Teaching Tuesday or Future Friday, where folks had some pre-reading. I would say we had about a 10% read rate, if that. So they were demonstrating the behaviors of the students they love so much. But it gave us something central to talk around. They made them know that we had a plan for the conversation, and it made it enough that I can justify scheduling this, even though what actually happens there is going to be more spontaneous. And that was fun. It was fun to as a host too, because instead of dictated lecture material, it was conversation with folks that you had hoped to run into. The element that was continually missing throughout all of this was the accidental conversation. The thing that Teaching Tuesday helped that Becca provided was the chance to talk about the things that were happening in the classroom with some sort of remedy for what you were experiencing, and then something to try afterwards. Something you might have with a colleague at lunch in a different setting, but were unable to generate naturally. So what we found is in this world, there is very little unintentional interaction, but we had to make it feel more organic, and that started to attract people back. So this is a theme. Go ahead.
One other thing too is one of the things we could do with Teaching Tuesday was also point them to, and we did it in Future Fridays too, but also point them to resources that are out there, teaching resources. So like Cornell has an incredible teaching and learning website that has incredible tools and great articles, and it's a great site. You should all check it out. And so we could use articles from that in our conversation, even if folks didn't read them. It might be on student engagement or something like that, but we could also push them toward checking out really good resources that are out there for them that they might not have otherwise stumbled on.
The one thing we've had success with since the formation of our CTLT is offering spaces for folks who may not be acquainted with a lot of folks across campus, but had ideas and didn't really have a spot that they could be heard and then moved along and turned into something. And so we've kind of each year and sometimes each semester have reinvented that venue that folks can come interact with each other and brainstorm towards something that was meaningful afterwards to make them feel like their passion had direction. So originally this was in person in Skunkworks, which was us gathering on one of our different campus locations just to see it and each other and talk through what we were experiencing. That ran its course. It was dwindling before pandemic happened, and obviously we couldn't continue it then. And then we tried to make it a more social event with our Think and Drink, which was an article and then a beverage cocktail suggestion. And then we would have a discussion board on Blackboard and then meet on Zoom to discuss it. You can imagine which things actually happened and what didn't from that. But it still provided a venue of social life that people wouldn't have seen otherwise. Then when we ran into the dissatisfaction of how the world had gone, people were kind of demanding an outlet for that. And so our Raucous Caucus was our chance for people to feel heard who felt silenced, either by their condition, by the way that their work was going, or by just the difficulty that the world had provided them. And that was really useful. We got to hear people and generate content from that. A lot of that got moved into ways of addressing people's mental health, wellness, and burnout. And those suggestions got collected in a way that was productive for us. The other thing that we saw there was it was starting to turn maybe a bit more negative than we wanted to be hosting. So we tried to refocus it into something that was productive and constructive. So we would use our Fridays to come up with brainstormed ideas for fundable projects so that folks could come up with suggestions that would make a difference. The school could offer funding for those that met an application protocol, and we would try to generate these from the conversations. So it was very cool to see something bubble up from an aside in a conversation on one of these Fridays to something that became a fundable project that benefited both the person and the school afterwards. And the one we did most recently is our Future Fridays, where we were just discussing the many avenues the future could take. And this became especially relevant for us as we're going through a president change. And there was a lot of uncertainty with how that was going to affect our future at a time we were already experiencing so much change. And that was us strategically looking at the future. And for me, Future Fridays was great because it created a coalition of folks that I got to see that I wouldn't have otherwise, and that were committed to the advancement of the school. So we scheduled that from 3 to 4, 3:30 to 4:30?
I think it was 3 to 4.
Yeah.
And there were many times where we got on at 3, I'd have to leave to go pick up my kid at 5, and I would come back and people were still on at 5:45 or 6. And these conversations were continually meaningful to the folks that were there. And it was really encouraging to me to see that folks cared enough about the future to dedicate their essentially weekend time to meet each other and work on the things that the school would want.
So what I'm going to do is use Dustin's brief breath to actually stop sharing because we have a minute or so left of our scheduled time and say, hey, attendees, what questions do you have for us? What else do you want to know about our success in the Zoom age and how we're building faculty professional development at Northampton? And if we don't have any questions that come up in the chat, or I will say to Randy, in 20 seconds, what's your biggest takeaway?
Biggest takeaway is Zoom is very cheap. There's no catering or, no cost. It's very archivable. We save and record a lot of stuff that we do and share documents on a SharePoint page. And it's really improved access, particularly for part-time people, but really for everyone, because you can just pop in and pop off, and you can go off cam if a student walks in or whatever. And finally, not everything is cut out for Zoom, but you can still do a lot of fun and innovative things online.
Yeah, and I want to just quickly answer Holly's question. And thanks for Beth for saying hello. Beth Ritter-Guth is our Associate Director, or Associate Dean of Online Learning and Ed Tech. We used to refer to meetings between our online team and our CTLT as the wine and cheese meetings. Was, how do we pair two wonderful training opportunities together? So Beth's team works really closely with this team. Our instructional designer works with the faculty fellows so that we can partner and shout out and showcase. I will say the other awesome thing about our Centers for Teaching and Learning and our faculty that run it is they tend to be the grassroots place where things gain sort of an interest within the community. And then the CTLT isn't needed the same way because they develop their own kind of presence in the community. Online Learning and Ed Tech has its own weekly newsletter. They have their own web page because they didn't need the same level of engagement. Now it's purposeful engagement. That is true with our relationships with our diversity team, our mental health teams that started with us and now have created their own presence in the college. And so we are definitely celebrating the uniquenesses, but love a wine and cheese pairing when the wine and cheese together make for good conversation. We are at 11:57, and I want to respect your need for the bio breaks and lunch between now and 12:05, which is going to come quickly. We are here. Please reach out. We're happy to share anything that Northampton does well. And thank you, Randy, Dustin, and Becca for being tremendous faculty and faculty fellows.